Adrian. He's an amazing educator and artist. He has done some really impressive things. And so I'm excited for him to share with you all because he has this interesting perspective of being an educator, but also being an artist and really honing his creativity while managing a classroom and the expectations that come with being a teacher. So I think he's going to have really valuable things to share with us, and I'm excited to share some of his work with you all as well. So as we begin, I just want you all to think a little bit about, we're specifically going to be talking about self-management and goal setting during this session. And so to get started, I just want you to kind of think about within your own classroom, what thoughts do you have about the words actually self-management and goal setting? And then how do you promote that within your classroom? If you want, you can just share in the chat.
I think that's definitely something that we all face as teachers. There are just some kids who explicitly need to be taught how to manage, self-manage, and I think there there is going to be a range of the types of students that you have within the classroom, and so considering this for your kids is going to be more of an individual thing rather than just saying like the whole class is going to be able to manage in this way. And I think we're going to really get into that when we move forward. Cosby said self management may be the first cousin to self care. I think that's like a very important thing to identify because in order to self manage and in order to achieve goals, we constantly have to be reflecting. And so self care definitely plays a piece in that. So I just want to give a little bit of background for those who are new and haven't been to our institutes before. We are Inspired Teaching, and our mission is to basically transform education in a way that teachers and students love going to school, that Mondays are a day that they look forward to. And the way that we achieve that is by fostering the four I's within the classroom, which are intellect, inquiry, imagination, and integrity. And then those are the foundation for our five rules, which are mutual respect, student as expert, wide-ranging evidence of student learning, purpose, persistence, and action, and very importantly, joy. So when we want kids to go to the classroom and to feel like they're in a place where they can learn and where they can pursue curiosity and to continue to learn with their teachers, we feel like these four I's and then the five rules of inspired teaching are really foundational for providing the type of classroom that they will do so. This is then deepened by learner needs. And so I know as educators, we're taught in college about William Glasser and about the needs that he has identified as needs for all people. And then he has sorted them basically to say which needs are most foundational and then which needs can build upon each other to be able to be successful within other things outside of social emotional learning. And so what we did was we created this resource that is called our ABCDEs of learner needs. And this is basically in order for all teachers and students to be able to be motivated to learn and to be able to understand what they need to learn, they have to ensure that these needs are being met and they have to understand what these needs are. And so we've identified the ABCDs as autonomy, having a say in what happens, being able to make choices and build independence, belonging, to be valued, connected to others through collaboration, competence, which is an inner sense of pride, importance, and self esteem, as well as feeling heard and respected, developmental appropriateness, which is the right amount of challenge, fueled by just enough skill to get through the difficulty, engagement, which is a big word that we hear as teachers, and that is making interesting decisions, problem solving, and interacting with others that is worthwhile. And then finally, through fun, which I said is one of our important ones. We learn through play, we experience joy, and we learn through opportunities beyond the ordinary. And so we really emphasize the ABCDEs of learner needs as something important for students to be able to develop in order to foster these things like self-management and goal setting. And we have connected this, or our framework aligns with CASEL's framework for social emotional needs. And with self-management and goal setting, we're going to talk about this with Adrian. But before we do so, I just kind of want to think about what
CASEL says about what self management is. And they define it as the ability to manage one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations and to achieve goals and aspirations. So, earlier, when I asked you, would you think about when we talk about the words self management and goal setting, did any of these ideas that CASEL has outlined for us as the definition of self management, did any of that come to you? Does that resonate with you now? And then what parts of this definition that CASEL outlines really stick out to you, specifically when you're thinking about your classroom?
I feel like, um, well, I teach high school, so I feel like since the pandemic, the relationship skills are a challenge for students. Um, and that kind of, uh, for lack of a better word, bleeds over sometimes into self-management. And I'll have to think about how that is so I can articulate myself a little bit better. But um, students are very quick to just kind of retreat into their phones, perhaps as a form of self-management. I'm not sure, but I think it also goes back to a reluctance to engage in conversation or relationships with others sometimes.
I think that's important. And I also think that, as you mentioned, since COVID, just really relational success has been changed tremendously. And the way that kids are interacting with each other and the way that they are interacting with the world looks very different. And so I think that we already face challenges with kids with self-management and with motivation, but now I think we've got an even bigger bridge to cross because we're adding in all of these components that Cosby mentioned, like technology, like distractions, like, motivation, and students not being able to identify what is really important to them, or not knowing, that priorities lie in education and such. So I do think that that's an important thing to consider. Alexandra was mentioning that the ability to manage emotions is fundamental, but managing is a word that she struggles with, and I think that that's a really important concept to bring up, because even just the way that we describe and talk to our students about emotions and the vocabulary that we use is very important, because like you said, managing can look very different to different people, and especially when we're teaching this to our students, we have to be mindful of how we present that information to them so that they understand that we're not trying to um, stop emotions or curb emotions or not feel emotions, but rather to be able to work through them and still be successful in the goals that we're trying to achieve. And so, as it says in this definition, managing one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations and to achieve goals and aspirations. I think that part is important in different situations, because certain types of emotion are going to be appropriate for certain types of environments and different situations. And so we have to be able to navigate that whole range of what that could mean. So when we talk about self management in general, we kind of sometimes face challenges ourselves as adults, but then can imagine that students who haven't practiced this could also struggle with, is the fact that sometimes having a vision of what we want our goals to be, or even being able to attach to a goal, especially when it has to do with school, can be a difficult thing to do. And so part of that lies in the ability to be able to listen to our own inner voice, to be able to really understand what it is we're trying to accomplish, to be able to tap into our own creative thinking, and to have the capacity to problem solve while imagining new outcomes. So, we're going to do a little activity together right now. And I think basically what this can foster and will also help with your students is that this activity that is an inspired teaching activity is specifically meant to practice working on like really massaging that muscle of managing our thoughts, managing our emotions, but then also visualizing and identifying what our vision even is for ourselves. And this activity is called Imaging to Music. And I'm so excited that the music we're going to be using today is actually created by our guest, Adrian Loving. So we're going to play this. And what you're going to do is you're going to close your eyes. You're going to listen to the music that's playing by our guest speaker. And you're going to basically just see what you see. Think about what you're visualizing, take note of what you're seeing, and just let your thoughts and visions take flight. Okay. And then from there, I'll tell you what we'll do next. So I just want you to notice how each person's visualization and the things that came to them was very different. And I think that this can kind of be a way to identify that this type of activity and this type of practice is very individual. What we're listening to and what we're envisioning is going to be different from everybody around us, but it's also going to be specific to what we need in that moment. What we're, whatever we have going on at the time is obviously going to affect the way that we're able to receive something like this. And it's going to be ever changing as each day starts anew. There's going to be new things that we face. And so, what do you think about having a practice with this with your students? How do you think that this would, how do you think that they could learn from this exercise as far as practicing creativity?
I think it'd be really interesting to see um, what it would look like in a classroom to see all the different things that students would see. I could picture something like this as a warm-up activity, almost something to do during circle time in the morning, as both like a meditative practice, but also an opportunity for students to practice talking to each other.
Definitely. And I think that kind of goes along with what Alexandra was saying. Depending on the age of your kids, this also could vary widely because, pre K students are going to have a very different response. They're probably going to want to dance and get up and be a little more active. And high schoolers may have a little bit of a different reception of this type of activity. But either way, it does open up space for establishing conversation, encouraging curiosity amongst each other, but also just really considering our own personal, like the way that we are meeting things when we are just giving ourselves time to sit, be quiet, and listen to music and not have all of the other distractions going on: phones, technology, social media. So yes, definitely, it does allow them to be creative for sure. So from here, we're going to kind of go deeper into our conversation about goal setting and self-management. This is an activity called the Discipline Manifesto, and this is basically a practice in continue our conversation about the fact that self-management and goal setting is not always attached to behavior. And so we're looking at what discipline could mean beyond behavior. So this is the dictionary definition of discipline. You can see that there are multiple of them. And I think that when we initially started the session and we were talking about self-management and goal setting, it's very evident that these types of words can have various meanings. And so even just within discipline, there is an array of ways that we can define what that means, but then also how to apply that within the classroom. I think oftentimes we get to a point now within the classroom where behavior is at this front and center of the conversation of discipline. And the reality is that discipline, especially when it comes to things like art and things beyond the classroom, can be a very different thing. So what I want you to do is I want you to think, after looking at this, what is your own definition of discipline, and share that within the chat. Consider if you were an artist, what would discipline mean in that context?
Thinking about how, particularly as an artist, discipline would mean being able to really listen to your inner voice, kind of like we were doing with the music exercise. So it feels like that's like a very internal thing.
But we've created this little activity that can be done with um, smaller students can draw in color, ways that they're able to communicate this, and you can approach this in a, you know, in different ways with different ages. But this is something that you can do with your kids, especially at the start of the year when coming back from the holiday, approaching the conversation of discipline and what that means, and taking the behavior piece away from the center focus, and getting kids to recognize that it's much deeper than just the behavior, but that also behavior is tied into it, obviously. And then if you go to the next page, they can identify here where they will show their discipline, or like how they will show their discipline. But then also they are identifying what they need in order to be disciplined in that way. And that's a really important component. As I mentioned earlier, we have our resource, the ABCDEs of learner needs. And this could be a great cross collaboration with those two resources, where students are able to say, like, I will need to feel competent in order to be able to show discipline in this. I will have to have autonomy to be able to show discipline. And being able to articulate that, I think, is the first step in them developing this self um, ownership of what that means within the classroom and what they're going to work toward when they're setting goals for this year. So I think these are both great examples of ways that you can present this activity to foster that conversation of what self management is. But I'd like to delve a little bit deeper and get into conversation with our guest for today. His name is Adrian Loving, as I said before, and he has been a professional with over 25 years of experience in the global creative scene. He's an art teacher, he's an artist, he is a music historian, a visual artist, a DJ, an entrepreneur, and so many amazing things. And so I just want to introduce you all to Adrian, and I'm going to ask you, Adrian, now to introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, I'm Adrian Loving. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And yes, I've been an art educator for, gosh, man, how many years now? Well, I was at Georgetown Day School for 11 years, private high school, teaching visual arts, sculpture, painting, ceramics, design, a little bit of music production. And before that, I worked in university here in University of Maryland and Howard, teaching graphic design. So kind of been in the game on some different levels for a while. And I've actually quit teaching to focus on my own business of music production and independent art education. So I have not necessarily left education, but I have left the classroom for now. So just full disclosure. But I'm working with different institutions such as the Smithsonian to do cultural programming that has education components in it. And I still have my network with schools and kids. So that's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
so let's get in it. You ready?
let's get in it. Yeah, of course.
All right. So we talked earlier about how CASEL defines self management as the ability to manage one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations and to achieve goals and aspirations. So these words, I keep bringing that up, self management and goal setting, are words that may evoke rigidity and strong structure, but are actually a lot more fluid and potentially ever changing when we self reflect. So, can you share your personal approach towards self management, and what does that mean to you, not only as an educator, but also just as a creator?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm a Capricorn. So Capricorns are always like very structured. I think that's just the nature of our sign. Um, and having been a teacher and having been in routine for so many years, getting up, planning out a lesson, thinking ahead, not only do you have to think for yourself, but you have to think for everyone else too. I mean, I think those sort of 360 thinking skills are what kind of put my mind in the right frame every day. With discipline, discipline is not easy to come by. You can't buy discipline. You have to learn it, and you have to learn the hard way oftentimes. So For me, I've I don't like to do a lot of redundant work, and I don't like to have to over explain or mansplain, as some people might call it. So I try to make a lot of lists, set goals for the day, for the week, and then my long-term goals. So, what do I want to do this summer? And what is it going to take to get to those goals, and sort of work backwards. If I have some things like today, I mean, we've been on Chris holiday break. I mean, people just got back today to get to their computers, but I already sent them emails. I was like, I'll talk to you on Monday. I sent those last week. So I fielded 6 phone calls today about projects. So some of that little extra time to get a little bit of the work out of the way helps you have more efficiency for later. So that's part of my discipline process, and work process, to think ahead and try to plan ahead you know
Yeah, that makes sense. And you've been doing it for such a long time. And so I think it's also invaluable because it's obvious that as time progresses, you learn more about yourself and you know what works and what doesn't work. And you're able to kind of hone your specific structure for how you approach self management. And so it sounds
hmm
like you've got a strong understanding of what you need. And as educators, I think that's what we're kind of trying to establish within the classroom. We're teaching kids how to get those first steps of experience with self management so that by the time they are your age or our age and they're often doing their things as grown-ups, they are able
hmm
to know what works for them and to be able to find success when they're trying to achieve goals.
hmm
So as you progress with really working toward finding what works for you with self-management and discipline, how have you found the relationship between the self-management and discipline to take effect in your life?
I think you have to have conversations with yourself all the time, and I think you need to be in touch with yourself, or find that space to be in touch with yourself. Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's a few minutes in the morning or in the afternoon. Sometimes just taking a disco nap, or sometimes having that coffee by the water cooler and just you know, addressing yourself, like, what do I need to do today? Hey, or running things by people. It's good to have a little cohort of like your close people that you can just say, hey, what do you think about this idea? Or, you know, so you can I'm all about farming out the work. Okay. When you farm out the work, and you are working with good people, then it helps make things a little bit easier for you. So you don't have to take the mental load on so much. So part of my discipline process is to structure your hierarchy of priority, um, figure out what things you don't have to do. Maybe you farm them out again to other people. With students, and I think I told you this before, Meg. I mean, I get my students to do a lot of the work of the day, especially with art. Sometimes I've had kids just run the classroom. Like, okay, you run this critique today, or okay, you run the class and ask kids what needs to be done. You know, so empowering others is a big part of the process. And I think we should be trying to empower kids to sort of be more independent. They don't have to be the teacher, but they also kind of like the challenge of running some things, you know?
Yeah, and I think that also gives them a sense of autonomy, which
hmm
is a need that needs to be met. And so them feeling that sense of autonomy also gives them sort of that responsibility that all high schoolers want to feel responsible for things. And so
hmm
I think giving that word empower is a very important one.
hmm
You kind of jumped ahead of me, so I'm excited that you got into this because I'd like to delve deeper into, what about the students who really struggle with this, the students who struggle with self-management and with discipline. Can you share with us like a success story and how that worked out for you, and then maybe also just an example of a student who it might have taken some time, but you were able to make a breakthrough with?
Sure. Yeah, I can share a story of one kid who was in my painting class last year. His name is Joey. I mean, sweet kid, super nice, but very much like a child of the COVID era, okay, where he was on he was on a screen for his junior high school years, 2 to 3, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. This kid is on the screen. And so he was having issues like, being socially sort of capable in the space. And you know, once I kind of got everybody going, I could one-on-one with him and just sort of feel him out, let him have a little bit of space. I mean, the kid was very talented and he was super capable, but he just didn't feel comfortable self-advocating and doing the work as I was hoping that he would. So he was also a kid. You probably have seen kids like this, like they're all the way in the back of the classroom. Like with my art room, you know, we would have critiques and I try to get everyone to come up front and be front and center. And so he would be in the back and I'd say, all right, you know, Joey, I need you up front. Come on up here. And I think the more I calls on him and the more he felt successful in like participating, the more I didn't have to do as much work. You know, he kind of knew what I was going to ask him and he knew what I expected and he participated. And before I knew it, you know, he's one of the best artists in the class, you know. So he ran on his own, you know, the electric motor had already charged up. So he was kind of going on his own, you know. I would say that's a good success story.
Yeah, and I think again, it's that idea of empowering students and allowing them to see within themselves what we already know about them. I think
Mhm,
that those students who struggle specifically with self-management and or with self-motivation in general, I think do need a little bit of the encouragement, and they need you to be able to say, okay, it didn't happen today. I'm just gonna try again tomorrow. And that's gonna,
mhm,
I'll try
mhm.
until you're able to see what I see. So I definitely connect with that, and I appreciate your example. So now that we're 6 days into a new year, which just seems crazy to me because it seems like 2024 was 5 seconds, but also 5 years long. Um, Teachers have resolutions focused on finding balance. We're really the topic of self care has come up a few times, and connecting with the joy of work as teachers, but then also life outside of school can sometimes be a struggle. So you shared how intentional you were while in the classroom when we were prepping for this, and I was very impressed with all that you had to share. Can you talk to us about what it means to feed yourself creatively while also teaching at the same time?
Sure. You know, artists have to do art. You know, some art, some. I can only speak as the for as an art teacher. I mean, I can't speak as an English teacher or a science teacher or whatever. But if in order to get better at your craft, you have to do your craft, and you have to figure out what is the balance of doing the work as an artist versus teaching the craft and the skill. And so, you know, the album that you guys heard or a song from the album, you know, like every day I worked on this. I'm sorry if there's any noise in the background. I worked on this album every day after school. Like I came home, I cooked myself a little dinner, I chilled out. I mean, I don't have any kids, so it was just me in this project. But it was therapy. It was therapy for the time where other people struggle with mental health issues and isolation during the COVID era, right? So that was the time that I could plunge into this music project and make things without the idea of perfection. It was just like, let me make it because it helped me get through another day. And then eventually things came together and, you know, I kind of liked where I was going and, you know, I could finish the project. But yeah, it's very important that you as teachers, I mean, look, we can't do this forever. And I think what we're doing now is very important and for the life of your career as a teaching, but you also have to like demand of yourself that you give yourself some of that like care and space from the profession and from the day-to-day activities. If you're not doing that, it's going to erode you very quickly, you know. So you can only choose what works for you. For me, it was music and art and that escapism, you know. You have to figure out what it is for you.
Yeah, and it does function literally as self-care, even when it's something that you enjoy so much and are creating for people to also enjoy. It serves as that form of self-care. And I think encouraging students to do that as well and being a model of that for students, I think can be important. And that kind of came up with Jenna and I when we were talking after we prepped for this webinar. I think artists work for self-fulfillment, obviously that's an important piece of it, and is, the central idea of what it means to be an artist. But um, we were both wondering if you saw any benefits to your students from pursuing your creative work outside of the classroom.
Yes, absolutely. So interestingly enough, while I was making this album and I was kind of testing it out, I played it in the classroom. I played some songs, and I just wanted to see how kids would respond. And, some of them were like, oh, this is cool. It's groovy. Or I didn't tell them that I made it at all. I just wanted to see what it was like to create this environment where people felt chill and chill enough to work. And so they will follow you, and then they'll start to ask you questions, and you sort of foster curiosity. And I think it's that dialogue that helps them to see you other than just like this person who's like giving them a test. You are a person who has a life and you're creative. And so that's what is means to be a good relationship. Um,
And so I want to know, both as a teacher and as an artist, what role does curiosity play for you?
I think you always have to be curious in life. I mean, you can't make people be curious. I think people have to discover curiosity and understand why it's important, And curiosity is the carrot that you have to put in front of your face to get you to the next place, you know. I'm yeah, and I think I think I'm naturally curious, but I think for students who may just be on their phones all the time or sort of a bit ambivalent, I mean, we're dealing with a different generation here. I think just slowly encouraging them to like pick up a book or like, hey, why don't you just discover some things about yourself or about this world that you're not gonna find on that phone. Okay. Like it has to be a messaging that happens like regularly, and hopefully it will take root and kids will be like, oh yeah, I like this thing, let me go down that rabbit hole. um Curiosity is the thing that can move you forward, so I find it's important for me personally to always be curious about something, you know
Yeah,
and be
and I,
willing to
I
go
think
down
it
the rabbit hole.
also, yes, yes, and I think people have brought up today, and through this conversation, we've had this idea of curiosity or of discipline as practice. And I think it takes a lot of practice to be curious. You have to practice curiosity. And so when we get into this routine of saying, I'm going to practice being curious today, I'm going to make an intentional effort to be curious today, we then tend toward the habit of becoming a naturally curious person, like you said you are. And so I think that this is kind of a habit that can be built within the classroom when we are talking about discipline and self management. Curiosity can always be tied into the conversation. It's a very important piece of continuing our growth within our school careers, and then expanding into our adulthood as well. Remaining curious is a part of just an important part of life for sure. And so that leads me in the last part, in connection to, is there a connection between curiosity and goal setting for you?
Yes. I want to say one more thing to what you just said. I mean, curiosity is the impulse, discovery is the reward. Okay. So as they're going to be curious about something. You want to point them in the direction of positive curiosity, and hopefully they'll understand that there's a reward for the discovery of something. Okay. Um, can you repeat that again to me your question one more time?
No, that's okay. Do you feel like do you find that there's a connection between your curiosity and how you set goals for yourself?
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I want to do stuff. And in order to be able to do things that are I perceive to be rewarding and fun and hopefully lucrative financially, in this independent practice, I have to set a goal. I have to say, all right, well, in order for me to get to where I think this thing is going to take me, what do I have to do? And so discipline and goal setting are very high. Like that's where you have to start. So you have to say, all right, well, let me write this list. These are things I need to do. And then I need to do them by a certain time. Okay. So by the end of this week, who did I contact? Who did I email? I make my list. I check my list off. I make it a bold highlight, or I, put it in red or something. And and it doesn't always work. Sometimes I get sidetracked. I mean, friends ask me out and I'm just like, oh yeah, let's go get some drinks tonight. And I don't do it. So it ain't a perfect recipe, but I try to stay pretty true to about 92% efficacy, right? Is that, if that's the word, right? I try to be on it at least close. Okay. So yeah, you set your goals, you knock it out, and then you self-evaluate. What did I do wrong? What did I do right? Was I going for the right goal? Did I shoot high enough? Sometimes I don't aim high enough. I aim lower than I should aim. You know, maybe I could have done this, but I only thought I could do this. So, you know, it's an experiment that always has to be kind of like tested. You know what I mean? You know, and
Definitely.
once you get a flow, you'll see your results, I think. Did I answer
I
your
could
question?
definitely see that. Definitely. And it was great. So before I would like to ask our participants a question, but before I ask that, I'm gonna ask you one final question, and then I would like to get some responses from the audience as well. So y'all can be thinking about it while Adrian's talking. What are you curious about today?
I'm like curious. Um, God, so many things. That's a big question. Um, ew, well, I'm curious how long it's going to take me to pack up my apartment before I move to my next place. I mean, I'm in a transition period of moving, and so I'm like, okay, what needs to be done here? Do I need to pack these books first? Do I need to sort through my clothes? Do I need to pack my records? I mean, I have a big studio over here, so I don't know what I should be doing, but I know I got to do it all. So I'm curious as to what should I prioritize in this move.
I
That's it.
love that. And I empathize. Moving is not fun. So I hope it goes as smoothly as possible. But for everybody else, I'd love to hear, what are you all curious about this evening?
My toes got cold out there today. I'm curious about how frostbite works. Like, what are the, yeah, just what is happening in the body when that's going on?
I'm curious about something that that Adrian was talking about when you were talking your about the relationship between goal setting and curiosity and kind of discipline for you. You gave a list of things that kind of drive your goals, you know, your passion for your art, but also part wrapped up in there was like making a living, being able to, you know, earn a living for the work that you do. And it was making me think about how when students are in school, what are the things that make their goals like what are the things that make their goals enticing in that same way, because they don't necessarily get paid for doing their schoolwork, and the rewards may feel a little bit further off or not always even really apparent. And so you're just making me think about the idea of how do we create um, that same sense of motivation without those same I hate to separate school from real world, but some of those other drivers that exist outside of school. I'm wondering what they look like or what's the equivalent in school.
Mhm. Can I respond to that or?
I'd love that.
Okay. Oh yeah, sure. Well, you know, I think there's healthy incentivizing, and you know, as an artist and as an art teacher, I try to encourage kids that art may not be your thing, but there's some practicality to being able to communicate visually. So even if you're sitting with friends or you're sitting at a potential job or you're sitting at something and you can communicate this idea visually, you're in a better position to actually get it done. Okay. Doesn't mean you're going to get paid for it, Some things are not always about money, but it might get you a little bit closer to something that you want to do. So I think making things as relevant as possible to the age group and to the mind, like, hey, if you really put more time into this, you could get an internship here, or, maybe your work can take you somewhere else. So planting those seeds is really what the incentivization is, at a certain level, you know, that
Yeah,
makes,
that makes sense. I also think that in listening to you, I was also really interested in when you were talking about creating the music for that album when you came home from work every day. And it was interesting that you said something about not being driven by the search for perfection.
mm-hmm,
And so I think that's also interesting because that also suggests you're engaged in the process as opposed to the product. And I
mm-hmm,
do think that's something that we are all seeking as teachers in the classroom, is how do students find joy and flow um and motivation in the process of what they're
mm-hmm,
creating without just being so this is like the flip side of what I was saying. How do we
mm-hmm,
find ways to motivate them towards something that isn't like a final product goal, but that joy that comes from being in a state of creating or discovering or uncovering? Or I loved what you said about curiosity being, and I meant to write it down, curiosity being the you said curiosity is this and something else is the reward. It discovery
discovery is the
reward.
reward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think, it's a quick answer that, I think a lot of it has to do with your philosophy as a teacher personally, because some people are by the book teachers. It's like, oh, I'll do whatever the book tells me to do, or I'm going to do whatever the curriculum is. But if you can color outside the lines a little bit, I think there's a way that you could take any discipline and make it more interesting for kids. I hated math, right? I really don't. Math is important, but math was not my thing. But as I make music and as I understand like these algorithms and these programs of music development, my mathematical mind is doing the work. It's not my creative mind necessarily, it's my mathematical mind that is actually putting together these compositions, but no one when I was in school was like, hey, math is music. No teacher told me that. I had to go out and learn it. And so you as modern teachers and more connected and integrated teachers can pull disparate things together and say, well, you know, you might be interested more in this if you understand that it is closer to related to this, and that's the work that we have to do, because school is such a dated archetype of learning in America. Like, you have to understand that we are way behind considering what other people are learning and how they're learning. And so if you have that flexibility in your practice and in your school and everything in your system, then maybe you can fudge those things a bit. I had to personally get out of it because I couldn't move in the way I needed to move to teach people to my fullest potential. That's my reasoning for getting out of it, you know.
Can I add something here?
Yes.
There's something in this conversation, that the question that Jenna brought up, and then Adrian, what you said afterwards, there's something about the idea of drafts that's ruminating in my head. And that when children at a young age are taught about the joy of drafts, then that has to do with process rather than or in addition to product. And in this country and in our culture, being the best, being the first, being the biggest, being the greatest, whatever, all of those are so valued. But sometimes the most creative people and children are the ones who are willing to put the extra time, the extra effort into it. And if children can learn about the idea of drafts and trying things out and doing it again and giving each other positive feedback, but also, constructive feedback, but in a positive way, it's really magical when you see it working. I'm not sure.
Absolutely. No, yeah, that's works in process. I mean, I think being able to built into the process of A to Z is like, let's reframe how we look at it as, I want you to appreciate like the work that goes into doing it, not what it is at the end, but the doing, you know. And
Yes,
yeah,
and for the kids to be appreciated for doing that extra work,
absolutely.
right? It goes both
Absolutely.
ways.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's something the teacher has to model, you know. Yeah.
This is all very important conversation, and I think we could go on forever. I think central to this idea is that curiosity will help everybody, but functioning from a position of curiosity rather than judgment, as we say at Inspired Teaching, I think is a really important habit to foster. And I think that the discipline and the self management is connected to that in ways that are really important. And I think also will um, lead to success with getting kids excited about the process and getting kids to really understand why we're asking them to do this rather than just coming back every year after the first of the year saying it's time to set goals. Okay, but we also know that when we look at adults and their New Year's resolutions, I think they say that the cutoff date for that is like January 10th or something. It lasts until like January 10th, I think is what the data is saying at this point. So, like, how do we get that to extend beyond just after January 1st? How do we get to that to extend from January 1st all the way through December 31st? And also, how do we get the kids to be the ones wanting to do that, wanting to self manage, wanting to be disciplined and to practice and to be a piece of this bigger picture. So this was such a beautiful conversation. I'm so appreciative to you, Adrian. I'm so glad that you were able to share with us tonight, and I'm really loved hearing about your experience and the things that you've shared. I do have a couple of things that I would like to share with y'all before we go. As I said earlier, the resources discussed today, and as well as Adrian's book and his album and information for accessing his website, is going to be sent in the follow-up email from here. We will also include his social media information in case you would like to follow him. And then we also have a curiosity campaign that we are starting on January 21st. And this is something that is going to last from January 21st through the end of the year, which is something we're very, very excited about. We're trying to really promote curiosity in this new year. Communication will be sent out on our website and on socials for what the next event is going to be. And then you can also follow us on social media, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and so on to find more information about what we have both in person and online.